In the winter of 1922, a man sat in Moscow with a pencil and a map of the Caucasus. His name was Ioseb Jugashvili. The world would come to know him as Stalin. He was 43 years old, a Georgian from the small town of Gori, and his official title was Commissar of Nationalities. His job, in plain terms, was to decide which peoples got a homeland and which peoples got a line drawn through theirs. The Ossetians were an ancient people, descendants of the Alans, Iranian-speaking horsemen who had roamed the Eurasian steppes since before Rome fell. By the medieval period they had split into two communities, the North Ossetians, settled below the main ridge of the Greater Caucasus, and the South Ossetians, tucked into the forested valleys above the Georgian city of Skinvali. Farmers. Goat herders. Orthodox Christians, as it happened, in a neighborhood full of Muslim neighbors. The Bolshevik answer to what they called the nationalities question was elegant on paper and quietly sinister in practice. Lenin had promised every people the right of self-determination. Stalin, the party's in-house expert on the subject, author of a celebrated 1913 pamphlet on the matter, had a more surgical interpretation. You gave each nation a territory, a school, a newspaper in its own language, a flag. And then you nested those territories inside larger republics, so that no group was ever quite sovereign, and every thread ran back to Moscow. In April 1922, the South Ossetian Autonomous Oblast was formally declared, a patch of forested ridgelines, highland pastures, and stone villages, placed administratively inside the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. The Ossetians received an autonomous oblast. The Georgians received the outer border. Neither population was consulted in any meaningful sense. What Stalin had drawn was not a homeland. It was a pressure valve, installed with care, set to a timer no one could read. Here is the part worth sitting with. The man who drew that line through the Caucasus was himself a Georgian. Stalin had grown up speaking Georgian, eating khachapuri, walking the red dust streets of Gori. He knew the Menshevik Georgian government he had just helped overthrow, knew their fierce, particular pride, the kind that made them resist Bolshevik rule even after the Red Army arrived at the city gates. So he drew his line with the precision of a man who understood exactly what it would cost, and to whom. The ink dried. The decree was filed. Other urgent matters, a constitution, a currency, a famine in the Volga basin, pulled everyone's attention elsewhere. High in the Caucasus, the villagers of South Ossetia went on tending their orchards and their flocks, their autonomy a piece of paper in a distant capital they would never visit. The line was so thin on the map you could barely see it beneath the mountain symbols. It would take 86 years and a short, savage war to reveal just how deep it had been cut. Strip away the revolutionary language and what remains is precise. One man drew a line that gave each group enough identity to recognize itself, and not enough sovereignty to leave. The Ossetians got an oblast. The Georgians got the border. Moscow got the leverage. That wasn't an error in the system, it was the system. And the fact that it held for 7 decades before it exploded isn't evidence of failure. It's evidence that pressure valves, if you never release them, eventually blow. What strikes us isn't that Stalin drew a bad line. What strikes us is that he drew a good one, precise, surgical, built with the knowledge of someone who understood both communities and still chose the arrangement that kept them dependent on a third party neither had chosen. Ignorance, at least, is correctable. But if expertise itself was the weapon, if knowing the most produced the line that served one side most, what does that tell us about who we trust with the pencil?